In this video, we're going to talk about cybersecurity in HR. If you're like me, you know next to nothing about it, so stay with me. That's coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams and the host of HR Shop Talk. I encourage you to subscribe to the show by clicking on the button at the bottom of the screen or listen to the podcast to keep learning from my guests. Today, my guest is Dennis Hill. If I introduced him properly, this would take 5 minutes. Suffice to say, he's been in HR and cybersecurity for a long time. He's an author, and he also serves on the board for the International Association for Human Resource Information Management. Hi, Dennis, how are you?
Hi, Andrea, glad to be here.
Certainly glad to have you. And I have lots of questions to ask you. And I know that our conversation is also going to wander a bit. So let's get right to it. So tell me, why and how is cybersecurity an important topic for HR?
Well, cybersecurity, Andrea, is an important subject for everybody. But when we talk about businesses and we talk about the information that HR handles on a daily basis, right. It's particularly important for HR people to be aware of the vulnerabilities and the technologies and the weaknesses, as well as the strengths when it comes to managing information in their organizations.
Right. You talk about vulnerabilities, and maybe we were going to talk about this later, but now I'm curious. So what kind of vulnerabilities are you talking about?
Well, there's the threat of hackers, but not just hackers external to the organization and obviously more automated types of processes like viruses and malware, but also insiders. When you're working with third parties, and HR departments are utilizing more and more third parties these days, not only to store information in the cloud, but also to do payroll processing, benefit management, right. Certainly health-related tracking. They need to be aware not only of the security that they have within their own organization, but particularly up or downstream when they're working with third parties. Those are the vulnerabilities that we're talking about.
Right. So is the vulnerability when the information is going from your organization over to that third party and back, or is it anywhere?
It's anywhere. Today with networked technologies, it's much more complicated. And of course, that data as it's transferring between systems matters, especially if you're using non-private networks and you're utilizing, say, commercial internet service providers, even the big technology companies. We're moving now to a different generation of internet technology where things will be more secure on the network, but you still have to be concerned about what's happening at that desktop or that laptop, and even as they're more and more sophisticated, our phones.
So maybe you've touched on this already, but can we talk about what's encompassed by the topic of cybersecurity? Like,
yes.
What is this?
Cybersecurity is involved in not just the software and hardware security itself, but in the management of the data. Okay. So data privacy, for example, is important. The control, who has control over that? The sharing of that information, right? User validation, just being able to log in onto the company network, verifying that they are in fact the right person. And we've seen some really great strides in security technologies like biometrics, like your finger, facial recognition. There have been a lot of efforts to prevent people from gaining access to technology. Mm-hmm. Very little has been done on the once they've gained access, how do we track them and isolate them? How do we quarantine them internally? Right. And we've seen where that has really devastated businesses when it comes to ransomware.
So, but what are the consequences from a business perspective if there's an accidental leak or a breach in employee data? Because that's mostly what HR is dealing with, right?
Right. Well, we've seen that people leave laptops around, right? The Office of Personnel Management, the federal level. I mean, millions of records were exposed. These things happen. They're not intentional. Well, certainly the cost, right? The remediation cost to business is a big deal because they'd have to secure that information. They'd have to notify everybody. Now we're into the area of reputation, right? So that's where you do
Right.
end up in the news. At this point, again, because of the lack of any federal laws with teeth in it, there really aren't any fines because of the lack of regulation in the United States for this kind of breach. And then, of course, we were on a fast track in the United States all the way through 2018, and then 2019. It looked like something was going to happen, and COVID hit at the beginning of 2020, and everything stopped. So that'll have to all be restarted. And then, of course, there's legal jeopardy, right? Right now, most consumers and employees, for that matter, of companies really have little recourse if there's a violation of their information, right? You get a letter from them saying, hey, there was a breach and we're going to give you a year or two of credit monitoring and that sort of thing. As new technologies do emerge that provide a more comprehensive security benefit, their legal jeopardy will go up. Those employers that aren't implementing those, for example, ransomware, there are solutions to remediate ransomware. That doesn't mean it prevents ransomware from hitting your network. It just means you don't have to be down for days or weeks or months. You can be back up in an hour, but it's an expensive technology. Well, let the lawyers work that out, right? Class action suit as they may be down the road, the lawyers will define the cost benefit of spending $50,000 to $100,000 per office or network to implement these solutions versus what a settlement would be in a major breach suit. See,
right. So you mentioned COVID there. How has COVID made this worse for HR? Wow. Somewhat obvious, but talk to me.
There's a lot of unregulated access now, unmonitored, unaudited, untrackable. And we have seen an increase in ransomware that have gotten into corporate networks particularly over the last year. Not just affecting the supply chain, but as I said, impacting health information systems and everything else in between that that are largely due to the hackers gaining access now to the weakest link in that network chain.
Right.
So I would say that's what that really did. That really exploded the vulnerability.
So what is, HR, we aren't tech people. You might be, but the rest of us aren't. So what is HR's role in managing cybersecurity? That stuff we typically turn over to IT.
It is. And again, IT would treat the data as if it was anything else, like accounting information or shop floor information. The legal jeopardy of having your shop floor data stolen is not nearly as great as having thousands, tens of thousands, or perhaps in the case of certain large enterprises globally, hundreds of thousands of employees' information stolen.
Right.
So HR cannot be hands off when it comes to cybersecurity.
Okay.
It is actually a responsibility for them to be concerned about all personnel, all human information in that organization. It's a role they've always had. But HR is also one of those departments that kind of adopted technology more on an evolutionary basis as opposed to a revolutionary basis. And that changed also with COVID, right? So HR was who was approached with, well, how are we going to interact with our employees working from anywhere? How can we monitor them? How can we make them feel comfortable again engaging with people, but over this thing called Zoom, right?
Right.
And all of that, your technology people just say, well, just load the program up. It's just fine. Well, that was okay up to a point until people, for example, found out that Zoom was transcribing conversations and storing them online. That was a big deal, especially when the courts found that out. And Zoom had to pivot away from that. So HR has an obligation. They don't have to be technology experts. They just have to know enough to ask the right questions.
If this has helped you in any way, hit like. And our question for this episode is cybersecurity something you've ever thought about before? And how could HR get more proficient in this area talk to us in the comment section. Okay, and so you were just saying that HR needs to ask the right questions. Okay, so what are those questions?
The same thing they would ask if they were going to buy a filing system for the office in which to store people's records, right? Who has access to it? Is this something that is auditable and monitored? What happens when the data is destroyed? Is it all destroyed? Are the copies destroyed? Those sorts of things. And what are we doing to prevent us from having access to that data by third parties? For example, you know, a payroll system or a benefits management system or something like that.
So
yep.
We talked about how all these employees are now at home, often using their own technology and accessing, you know, the data from work. How do we protect that? What are the right questions there?
Well, again, there's standards, there's checklists. So you can audit the remote computers, right, with their permission. A lot of people are not happy with that. So that would be a problem for a third party or even the employer to impose, but it could be something that's self-assessed and that diagnostic provided to the employee to do themselves and then submit that. There's lots of monitoring, like cameras, right, you know, is one, and monitoring people. That's a highly debated issue. Creating virtual private networks so that there is an extension over the internet or that is private, that basically makes that home computer or home located computer resident on the corporate network. Now, in those cases, there are logins and procedures and things like that so that the employee would have to give the company some access to that in order to achieve that level of security.
Right. You talked about the VPN and stuff. Is that expensive?
No, actually, VPN subscriptions are probably the price of a malware monitoring program these days. And in big quantities for large enterprises, they probably can negotiate it down to a few dollars per user.
So that's easy.
It is. The vulnerabilities, though, are still, again, open within the network from insider activity. Can't really do much with that.
Right. I want to just sort of think about this from a real HR angle now. So if we think about HR as having responsibility for all these people processes from recruitment to separations, where are some key cybersecurity touch points?
Well, we started talking about that. We said the online application, right? An applicant tracking system. They put everything on there. That is the first, because a lot of personal information is captured and stored in perpetuity, whether you've hired the person or not. There's very little data scrubbing that's going on, again, because there's a lack of laws requiring that in the United States. And then as we mature beyond the concept of computer users to a recognition of who are data owners versus data gatherers, you as an employee are the owner of your personal information. You have shared that with employer ABC, but employer ABC's a gatherer of that information. They don't own that information, you do. So if you don't get the job, you have a right, and the gatherer has an obligation to scrub that. Yes, people think it's a very sophisticated age we're living in, but we're not. All right, we're still in the Wild West quite a bit, and so you're going to have outlaws and you're going to have sloppiness, right? When we first invented cars, we didn't have stoplights, we didn't have divided roads, and so there were a lot of horse injuries from running into cars and things like that. That's the same thing today, and I don't see that cleaning up anytime soon. Maybe in my lifetime, but there's always going to be a sloppiness out there because the level of, and let me hit this on the HR side. We need to invest in the education and training of our workforce for new skills that are needed for the knowledge age that we're in. There's new architectures, right? We have 5G wireless. That is not a cell phone upgrade. This is a major change in the way in which digital devices communicate over the internet. It allows you to do very powerful computing in your hands that are secure. That it gets down to really a decentralized world. Instead of everything having to be validated by a central computing system.
Yes.
The other technology that's making its impact is this idea of blockchain. And if I can summarize what that is real quickly, it's taking your data, maybe this piece of paper, it could be an application, it could be a database, chopping that up into many, many, many different blocks, and each block being encrypted, coded, and stored somewhere out on the internet in the cloud, but not as one big document, right? It's all these thousands of pieces scattered on the cloud, and each piece is about has about a 1 in 15 trillion chance of being hacked. So now you multiply that by all the possibilities across the board, and what do you end up with? Impenetrable data storage. Why am I even talking about this? Because it is the perfect solution, near perfect, that we had today technologically to really secure people's data. And part of what we've done at IREM is established this thing called DEHR, or Decentralized Human Resource, which is a consortium. It's a global consortium. We adopted something called the Presidio Principles, which are really a data ownership bill of rights for you and for me as employees, but also as individuals under the World Economic Forum. And we have invited all of the national HR associations to participate as the agencies of record that will say, Acme Corporation, ABC Consulting, these are legitimate businesses, and they authorize them to then put their employee files on the blockchain, a common blockchain that each and every employee has control over, their data. What have we created? A global workforce database. For what purpose? Easy portability of verifiable information that can't be hacked, that can't be defrauded, that can't be photoshopped. It addresses the issue, for example, one of the other founding board members out of Australia and I co-wrote a paper last year on COVID-19 vaccination verification.
Right.
We didn't use the word passport, but this was months before it became a debate in the public eye. This is exactly what a blockchain-based workforce database is all about. Now, blockchains are incompatible with one another. There's a company, I won't name it, in the cryptocurrency field that would exchange, for example, one cryptocurrency for another. It was a brokerage trading thing. They got hit. The problem wasn't breaking into the blockchain of the cryptocurrency. It was in that exchange database transaction that this third party was doing. That was the weak link. That's where the hackers got it. And they stole millions of crypto. Well, it's no problem if you stay in your neighborhood, right? Stay on your blockchain. But, you know, all of the HCM systems out there are going to have something like this, and decentralizing the storage using blockchain technology, having a network infrastructure based on 5G and 6G technologies that are supposed to be coming out by 2030. They build new applications on this, and they're going to be built around these technologies, and some of them already are. We see it in big companies like SAP with their supply chain solutions right now. That's obviously under pressure to get straightened out. You don't want products ending up in the wrong locations. You don't want to see, you know, just-in-time inventories explode because somebody broke into the system and ordered 1,000 times more than what they need, right? So as we become more interconnected, people are starting to understand that we are an Internet of Things and people, that the two are really inseparable. And I like to push that as a concept for the HR community to understand. We need to embrace the people factor on the Internet of Things. And if we can do that by agreeing that we're an Internet of Things and people, then these security mechanisms will be on the forefront of consideration and not an afterthought when a breach occurs, which is exactly what's occurred for the last 40 years.
All right. So final question here. We've covered so much and you obviously know so much. So where can HR professionals start to learn more about cybersecurity as it applies to HR?
The HR associations themselves, that's out of their wheelhouse. They're not, HR people, like you said. We're HR people. We're about people. We're not about the tech.
Right.
The Lighthouse Labs is great. Obviously, IREM, which has been around now. This is our 41st year, and with that crossroads role between technology and HR. We offer webinars and programs and in conjunction with partnering with organizations like Lighthouse Labs to make sure that subject matter experts are promoted and recognized and they understand who our audiences are. Because 90% of data security, information security, privacy, cybersecurity is the same in any vertical field. It really doesn't matter. The issue here is that the legal jeopardy and the responsibility for data governance falls firmly on the HR people in businesses. And then, of course, the decentralized HR consortium. That's especially if people are members of SHARM or HRCI, and they want to engage. Obviously, I view the IREM organization as an extension of those. For people who have an HR background, but they say, you know what, I'm not going to avoid my responsibilities in understanding technology. I'm going to go for it. So the HR IP certification is great through IREM, and the practical application of that is global. That's the reason for decentralized HR or DEHR, that consortium.
Okay, well, I will add links to all of those in the description of this episode. And thanks, Dennis. There was so much learning here. I did an episode on recruitment automation, which wasn't quite so technical, but I love that one too. And the link for that is right here. Thanks for watching and see you next time.